Impro Theater and the cast and crew of this online performance would like to take this time to honor the indigenous peoples of the ancestral and unceded homelands we each inhabit, and to consider the legacy of colonization. In Los Angeles, we pay our respect to the Gabrielina Tongva peoples. Impro Theater supports the promotion of an anti-racist world, where we recognize diversity, equity, and inclusion as central to our values. We are listening, learning, and growing. We invite you to join us in taking action wherever we can to create a more just world. Impro Theater and the cast and crew of this online performance would like to take this time to honor the indigenous peoples of the ancestral and unceded homelands we each inhabit, and to consider the legacy of colonization and its far-reaching effects. Hey everybody, and welcome to Impro Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Mike Rock. Very excited for today's guest, Paul Rogan, coming up shortly. Please welcome our guest, Mr. Paul Rogan. Woo!
Hello, Mike. Hello, everybody.
Woo! Paul, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And we already there are already questions coming in for you before I even get started. We've already got questions. I don't know what to do about this. So I'm going to I'm not going to go to those questions quite yet.
We'll stay here all night until every question is answered.
we will. Paul, inquiring minds want to know. So you're an Impro company member, faculty member, director of company shows and hybrid shows that are some students, some community members, that sort of thing. You are an actor, a voiceover guy, a director, a compere, an MC, all these things. You do a lot of things. Tell me, what is your favorite thing when somebody says, ready, set, go? You're on stage doing a thing. Which of all those things do you think you're doing that makes it your favorite?
I think if I had to say, it would be standing in front of a big mic at the BBC, doing a radio comedy show, reading somebody else's brilliant script, playing a ton of different characters with different voices, and getting laughs out of the scripts that weren't even there. Just because there's so much joy inherent in the script, and our job is to find it. So some of my greatest memories have been in the fine old BBC Radio Theatre in Piccadilly in London, doing some of that, especially with friends as well. And that probably would be my single, because it's kind of improvisational in the way that you don't even see the script sometimes. You just handed this chunk of thing, and then you just have to record it. It's like the oldie days of radio. In fact, it is the oldie days of radio. And then you just kind of go out there and work it out as you go along. Sometimes you have the leisure of preparing something and kind of go, oh, I could do that one Northern English, or I'll do that one very posh, or, trying to mix it up. You're a voice guy yourself. You know how these things work.
Yeah.
So there are many, many things, but I think that one is my favorite.
I've never done a proper what you're describing, like where you're a hired hand to come in, or a hired voice, so to speak, to come in and take a script and walk out there into a studio, booth, soundstage, whatever it is, and do radio play or radio comedy in a real proper format. I imagine that's really exciting.
It is, but the special delight is that these are more often than not the comedy ones done in front of a live audience.
Oh man, that'd be great.
Fill the BBC theatre They're all there. They might well be fans of the show. They're certainly fans of coming to see radio comedy being recorded, and so they're just hooting with laughter before you even start. And so that's half of the joy.
What a treat. Do you remember, did you audition for that, or did somebody that knew your comedy ask you to be involved?
It's the latter, really. It's word of mouth, at that time in London, I was kind of like a stand-up comedian working in and around Britain, and you kind of get known for that stuff. And then once producers know you, they bring you in rather than audition. They just piece a cast together, so that's kind of how that works. It's a joy when somebody says, as somebody did once, come in and play a character, not like the jobbing voice guy, but I did 2 or 3 seasons of a show with Roy Hudd and June Whitfield, 2 of Britain's best loved and most beloved TV comedy stars, playing a character in a sitcom that ran on BBC Radio, and my mum came to see it being recorded, and she sat and watched as June Whitfield leant over. Nobody knows who in this country June Whitfield,
but that's okay. I mean, it's give us an equivalent. Like
it would be the. I actually can't think of an equivalent, but a hugely beloved sort of housewifely actress who plays, and so because my mum has no idea what I do. She has no conception. I know that there's a ton of people watching this who know exactly what I mean, because there are very sophisticated parents who are like, Paul did, but my mum is like, so what? How are you earning your living again? No, well, tell me what it is. Have you got a proper job yet? But if I'm on TV and she can see me on TV, or one of my people I knew who become famous, or Paul was on television, and that's a comprehensible thing. So that's the only way it works.
Paul's mother is Irish.
Yes, indeed. From County Cork. So they have a strange accent down there on the west coast of Cork. And it goes up and down like this, and it's different from every other accent you'll ever hear. And it's so that I have cousins who have that delightful accent.
There's this an Irish or Irish American, I guess, second or third generation friend of mine in New York once told, he said, where's your family from? Where's your ancestry from? And I said, County Cork. And he said, well, that's what all Americans say, because that's where the boat left. But in fact, I think one of my uncles has done the ancestry thing and sorted it out that we are, in fact, that my lineage does go back to Cork. Although right. I'm going to need to take the class because I need to brush up on mine. Because I went through, as an actor, I went through that period of time when I thought I was brilliant at accents, and then tried them out for the wrong people who said, like, no, that's not very accurate right there. So
you don't know. I mean, British accents. So 2 things. Firstly, as soon as you leave Ireland to go to America, you're American. You could have stepped onto the boat at Cork Harbour, but as soon as you've stepped onto the boat, the American's gone. Nobody knows he's gone. But I was born here. Grew up next to you on the farm. I know you're the American now, so you're gone. So they're not, I would go back and tour doing stand-up comedy and saying, oh yeah, my mum's from here, playing in Cork. And you're English. You're English.
Oh man, well that hurts.
I have nothing. My ancestry is taken away from me. But yeah, people are. It's very thing. We're all voice guys, and we think we're very arrogant about our voices, and we think they're really great until somebody says, "No, that's really not good."
Well, the thing is, what happens is you can convince. If you, in my case, if you're teenage or college aged American actor person, and you're talking to other American people who don't know any better, you can do an accent and convince them that, oh, this dialect is a perfect, Liverpudlian dialect or something like that. But the moment you're in front of a legitimate person from the UK, the jig is up. I mean, they say
it absolutely is. But then there is a big difference. There is, for example, I've never been booked to play like a leprechaun-y kind of character, because that is not an Irish accent. Right. It's an Irish American. It's an Americanized version of what an Irish accent in theory sounds like, and it's its own thing. It's got nothing to do with Ireland, and I can't do that. I can't do that American leprechaun voice. Because you have to learn it from scratch. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of British tonalities in the way that Americans are taught British English, which are flat out wrong. But all the American actors have exactly the same things that are wrong taught to them. So part of my job is to go around sort of saying, no, that's one of those sounds that you're all taught wrong. And to try to kind of like make some little improvements here and there.
Right. Have you ever done one-on-one dialect coaching?
Yes. I was doing a session just before today, in fact.
Yeah. And has anyone ever thrown you I need to do this accent in a big hurry, and you don't have any experience with it, but you're like, all right, I'll give it a shot.
Because we have an ear. We can hear and pick things up pretty quickly, and sometimes I like just the challenge of, oh, what's this new thing, and what's characteristic about it, and how can we learn what's involved in it and see if we can reproduce it. Because half the time I think you're better off dealing with somebody who knows how to teach people, right, than someone from I've got this thing, I'm supposed to be playing someone from Vilnius in Lithuania, and I'd be like, all right, let me do that, rather than get a Lithuanian person necessarily who might not know how to teach you to get to the same place. That's probably nonsense and voiceover arrogance again. And I'll.
And you've just lost clients.
I just lost clients. Yeah.
So do you imagine that this is what I imagine? I imagine from my experience that it's hard for an American, or me in particular, I guess, to start trying a South African dialect and not slide into sounding New Zealander or sounding Australian or sounding English. Like, for me, there are these similar sounds in Australia, New Zealand, or South African, etc., and they kind of get a little jammed up in my head, I guess.
Yeah, and they get mixed up. Why don't you say the Bostonian Harvard Yard sentence? That one.
Park your car in Harvard Yard.
All right, I've been using that for Australian practice. I parked my car in Harvard Yard. Because because it's the same A sound with and there are these components of accents and dialects which just cobble together in different ways, and by the time you're finished, you end up with an accent or dialect. But 2 days ago, I found a thing which was like all the Scottish accents, and because you think, oh, a Scottish accent, it sounds like this, doesn't it? It sounds like this. This is a Scottish accent, and then you listen to this website which shows how there are dozens of Scottish accents all over. From you go 20 miles and there's a different accent with different words inherited from Norse and Celtic and Irish, and they all sound different. It's like when my friend Mike Randleman did for me the accent tour of the South, because British actors thought, well, I can speak a Southern dialect, and then Mike says, nah. No, here are some Southern dialects for you, Paul. And he's from, I think, Louisiana. He did the whole kind of state to state to state and how they're all different. And that to me, I love that. That's me in my happy place.
Yeah, I know Mike Randleman. I haven't seen him in years. That's great. All right. So, but by the way, everyone, this is not an advertisement for Paul's accents and dialects class, but and yet at the same time it
voice
is.
guys, so it.
So this brings us right to our question. Paul, you are known for your accent work. What are some challenges and benefits of creating a character with an accent? And do you prefer playing a character with an accent or speaking with your natural pattern?
Well, I've had to try and make myself perform in my natural voice because I have never performed in my natural voice. Everything I do is a character voice until the last few years when I've tried to make myself speak. I have my natural voice is South London, so it's really flat and dull. So a lot of people are like me, they're Londoners with really dreary London voices. So doing voices, character voices, is a way of making yourself more interesting. And that's true of a lot of Brits. It's been true of my improv too. Almost every improv I do is with a character voice of some kind, even if it's Jane Austen playing something like this, which is not my natural voice, or even playing Chekhov. I'm doing a sort of theatrical voice. The advantages of it are that you get to very, very easily the characters you're playing. I think it's the easiest way in the world, apart from simply changing hats, to go out on stage and simply do two different voices. But that's for me. I'm sure that someone who is an absolutely astoundingly good physical actor would probably say, no, I can vary myself physically more, but I can't.
Right. Do you? When you do voice, you do a lot of voiceover work. You do commercials and corporate stuff and that sort of thing. Do you speak typically in your own voice for that sort of work, or do you get?
Yeah, that's interesting because you'll never. I mean, someone I know in England who does a lot of. I remember him saying he was an English guy, did a ton of English voices. He said everything is a character. Everything is a character. So let's say you're doing something which is an enthusiastic voiceover, selling something like this. That's not me. That's a voiceover. Even if you get the dreaded request to do conversational, it's not really conversational. It's in fact, you're probably going to attend the same workshop as me about how to do a conversational voiceover because it means different things to every single person. It's like the dreaded transatlantic. Can you do a transit or mid-Atlantic accent? No, there's no such freaking thing. So we're all doing our best stab at doing a voice. Nobody wants to buy something in this voice with its hesitancies and stumblings. You don't. So you're going for something much more fluent and probably a little deeper and sexier as well. I mean, this sounds like terrible cheesy voiceover now, but
yeah, but I'd buy it. The other thing, I don't think people who don't do voiceovers regularly don't know this, but we hear this call from producers to make it sound natural and conversational all the time. And the thing that so I'm standing there in front of the microphone saying like, okay, it's buy 20 and get 3 for free, blah, blah, blah. You know, like talking like that, trying to sound natural and conversational. And then you hear the commercial, or, you know, you either see the commercial on television or you hear it, whatever it is. And it's all like this. And you're like, what? Wow, where did the conversational thing go that you were so desperate to ask for, you know? Yeah. Do you ever do? We're getting more questions, Paul. I'm sorry. Do you ever do Canadian accents, and do you feel that Canadian accents are misunderstood by the American public?
Yes. Well, one of the things I'm interested in is the way that Canadian actors remove all of the sounds of their accents in order to appear in American shows. And I love watching shows like Supernatural, where the Canadian actors haven't bothered because they're in Canada, so they don't feel the need. But, you know, we in Britain, we have the old sorry, those sounds which we put into to our fake Canadian accents. But I knew a ton of Canadians in London who just made a mountain of money doing American voiceovers by removing all of the trace of their Canadian sounds. And yes, it is, and it's also very regionalized. There's no such thing as a Canadian accent. There's probably a standard Canadian accent, but there are different accents in different places.
Of course, and Quebecois in Montreal and etc.
Well, Quebecois, tabernacle. I was
all
once
the Montrealians, all the
the
people in
Quebecois
Quebec just
turned on.
turned off. They're going to
Yeah.
get complaint letters. Paul swearing on our. I love it.
Uh,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah, I was up country in the Laurentian mountains in Quebec, and on a bus trying to get back to Montreal. And the guy on the bus, he was trying to help me. He was trying to help me. I speak absolutely excellent French, and he could understand me because I was speaking Parisian French. I couldn't understand a word he was saying, even when he was speaking slowly,
yeah.
because their accent is just like, I can't make head or tail of it.
I remember trying my French in Montreal and having people kind of I didn't, not doing well. And then in France, people were very happy to hear me try to speak in French,
They are
even though,
now.
you know,
Oh yeah, they are now, but they never used to be. There's
yeah,
kind of like a thing in France where there's like it's a national thing of like, please do not try and speak my language. There is no
yeah,
point. I can, but there was uh, there was a thing of trying to you would try and speak French and they would immediately switch to English.
yeah.
And that's even a change because in the past they didn't even speak English. So there wasn't any kind of communication, just a kind of an eye rolling. And let's change the subject because
Well, let's change the subject. So,
yeah.
before you came, so you had a legit acting and comedy career going on in the UK before you
Yeah.
fled on a fruit boat or a merchant ship or something.
Yeah, I left England and the English said, hey, you're American now. As soon as I stepped onto a plane.
What? So tell me about just real quickly. I want to go through some. I can't. The time is just going away. So you did some time with the Comedy Store Players, famous improv.
I'm one of their official guests, which means that there's like about 8 Comedy Store Players, and then a huge number of guests. But I've guested quite a lot with the Comedy Store Players. That but not for a little while because I've been out of the country, and you fall out of mind. But doing the Comedy Store is the most prestigious gig in English improv. And they're brilliant. I mean, they are just brilliant. It's as funny a show as I've ever seen. It's just flat out comedy.
And do they perform regularly? Do they have like a weekly thing or
twice a week? Twice a week, and then lots of corporates and all of that kind of stuff too. So it's like an adjunct for them. They actually make pretty good money from it, amazingly. It's a live gig. When they were starting out, famously, the guy who runs the Comedy Store in London assumed it wouldn't make any money. So he said, I'll give you a door split, guys, right? And they were like, whatever. And the door split has turned out to be a really impressive sum of money every show they do.
And that's
for
been
20 years.
That's like 40 years or something, right? Isn't that like
I may have lost track of time, but it's been
early
30
80s?
years.
Early 80s?
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And you worked with Eddie Izzard and Friends with a show that he did?
Yeah, Eddie is a contemporary of mine. We all started together. I was one of the 2 MCs who would replace him when he was off doing, because he ran a gig himself famously, and when he was not doing that gig because he was booked elsewhere, there's me and another guy or another guy would deputize for him. So and then he put together, when he would do his one-man show. And then there were some times when he would just have a bunch of improvisers come at the end of the show and do an improv set, and the whole audience stayed behind nearly all the audience would stay behind to watch a bunch of improvisers and him have fun. And that was Eddie and Friends, following on from his stand-up show.
Yeah, I got to do stuff with him in Montreal. My group from New York went and did the Just for Laughs Fest a few times, and one year he was there. It was the first time I'd ever even seen him, and he just jumped right in with us a couple times and played with us, and it was just such a gas. It was just man, it was really fun. And you did you had a double act. You did a of
Yes.
Sean Connery's or something like this. What was it again?
Yeah, that's the Sean Connery Brotherhood, and that's how a lot of people transition into stand-up if they're not naturally stand-ups. And I was never naturally a stand-up. I was always a comedian or improviser or whatever. And out of one of my shows, me and my friend James Gaddis would often end up just playing Sean Connery at the end of a scene. The scene would somehow mutate, and everybody would be Sean Connery. And then we decided to put together a double act using improv, but it gradually became more structured and based on James Bond, because my friend James Gaddis was extraordinarily handsome and easily fitted into the role of a secret agency kind of person, and I just played all the other characters around the side. And then I did the same act with a couple of other friends, Phil Whelans, Luke Sorber, and Patrick Marber, indeed, did it with me. The Oscar-nominated screenwriter did it as well with me for a couple of shows.
What was it like with Phil? Was it?
Phil is such a charismatic performer. He's naturally funny. Phil is on screen. Phil has just appeared on screen.
This is all a bit of a coincidence, meeting you here. I was just sitting here minding my own business in the middle of the night, and suddenly you popped up.
How are you doing, Phil?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm very well. I was just going to say, before you popped, because I didn't know you were coming here, I was going to say that Mike posted a thing of his destroyed computer, and I almost immediately you posted, what about putting it in some rice, which made me laugh out loud for a very long time.
I think Facebook posts are really my métier. Of all the performing arts, I think classical ballet and Facebook posts are probably the twin pillars of my artistic life.
And so should they remain. I think that anything more than that is too challenging for all of us.
It is.
What time is it there, Phil?
It's just gone
2 in the morning.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm more or less nocturnal now. I've joined a cult, and a lot of the ceremonies are at night. Apparently they work better at night, so
I see your cult is you wear that double diamond hat. I see.
That's right. Yeah. This is a headdress. Yeah.
Apart from being a wonderful improviser, Phil is also an extraordinarily funny scriptwriter who has just absolutely unique sense of humor.
Oh, you.
Yes.
But that's not what we're here for.
I wrote one of those radio shows that you did with an audience, 2 series of a sitcom, and that was with an audience, and I can certainly vouch for when Paul says it's a real sort of joy to do something that you're basically sight reading. So it's scripted, but it feels like improv because you're kind of sight reading in front of an audience. So the performances from a kind of radio show can be really great because people are just kind of going with their instincts and just giving their first read of these lines, and
which is often the best read.
Yeah. It's really kind of the atmosphere in the theatre is very light. People know that it's very spontaneous and it's just coming off the page into their ears via these performers, and it really is a great thing to do. It's, I'd love to write another series and get that one made as well.
I'll play an American if you let me.
Well, Paul mainly does our American characters, but I'll see if Paul's got a night off and he might be able to give you a gig.
Or we'll just get a Canadian to do it.
Yeah, they sound American. Since we've interrupted Phil's evening, could you tell us a little bit about touring with your, doing your double act, and what that's like, being two guys? I imagine you're on stage right after a stand up, and then there's going to be a stand up after you or something. And
quite often. It's sort of great, you know, when Paul did the act with James, I knew Paul by then. We'd met at theatre sports at this West End theatre, the Donmar Warehouse, and I saw the Sean Connery Brotherhood, and I think Paul just said that James, with his raffish good looks, was getting some really good acting work, and sort of, you know, basically kind of couldn't do the double act anymore. And I was like, I'll do it with you. So in the interim,
this is one of those I asked you. No, I asked you.
Did you?
I was coming to for the point. The point of it was for me to. That was one of those. Will you go out with me? I want to go out with you conversations. But you were, yeah.
My memory was that I practically banged your door down because I sort of knew that James. I knew you were going to stop doing it with James, and I knew you did it with Patrick and Luke. But I was like, I want to do that act. I wanted, because I'd seen it and I thought it was great. So I said to Paul, you know, listen, if you're looking for anyone to, you know, take it on full time, I'll do it. So we did it for like 5 years, maybe something like that. We started in '89. I don't know.
No, we must have started in 2003 because I'm not that old.
Right, yes, clearly, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
This is Hollywood, Phil.
Yeah. Paul was a friend of my father's. That's how we met originally. Paul used to bounce me on his knee, sometimes on his buttocks,
which was very odd because you were older than me at the time.
Yeah, that's right. But it was really great. That's sort of the time we did it. The comedy scene was really kind of exploding. This, you know, in the UK there was this kind of punk rock of comedy, alternative comedy it was called, and that sort of began in a couple of clubs in London in about 1979, 1980.
Oh, it must have been 2000.
Yes. And centuries went by.
Yes.
By the time we were doing it, it was really rolling. You know, comedy was the new rock and roll, and there were tons of clubs to play and colleges all up and down the country. And it was a brilliant time to do it. And the sort of, I don't know, I loved it. The sort of camaraderie of comedians, the sort of fraternity of comics in the dressing rooms, you know, before and after shows was great. Sharing
lots of Americans, Canadians, Australians, all sorts of people came into Britain at that time in order to take advantage of that. The fact that we would hear. I remember being in Montreal, Mike, and hearing somebody saying, "Oh, I'm going off to do a gig," and they were going to be driving for 10 hours and staying in the comedy condo. And we were like, oh my God, the furthest you can possibly go in England is about 3 or 4 hours. And you could double up Southampton and London on the same night, which I did once. So just the sheer geography, a huge number of people crammed into a smaller space meant that the economics of it were much better than people who had to fly or pay a lot of money for gas.
Yeah. But we... Yeah, there was some other double acts around, but quite often you'd be the only double act on a bill because it was too big a diluting of the money if the bill was all double acts. There was one venue, the King's Head in Crouch End, where Pete Graham, who booked that gig, you turn up and there would be one act with like 5 people in it, another double act, and us, and you'd be like, we're going to get paid nothing tonight. Pete gave no real thought to.
This was one of the best venues ever.
Yeah, it's a brilliant venue.
And I was there one night when a new American act was coming in to headline, and his name was Jon Stewart, and he arrived and he was like, "What the hell is this?" And it was this little underground cellar. But by the time it was packed full of people, he did an hour of genius comedy, and afterwards he was absolutely aglow. With this kind of like, oh my God, because I expect people come to England and they think comedy is probably going to be, I say, would you like some tea? And 1 lump or 2. What do you think I am, a camel?
You still remember the act, Paul?
Yes, I do.
Remember it. Great days, great days.
No, it's Great Danes. That was.
Oh yeah.
Well, we brought you here together to sort of see if we could make up for, I know that there's been a rift over lawyers and money and things like that. And so this is my attempt to try to, fix the rift.
Paul doesn't allow me to use my name anymore. Paul owns my name. That's why my screen doesn't have a name on it. Paul owns my name.
Yeah, I call myself Philip Whelans when I'm committing crimes.
Paul Philip Whelans Rogan, he calls himself.
Wow. Yeah. Well, this has been delightful to have Phil join us. Paul, do you have any questions about what's going on in England that you want to?
What's going on in England, Phil?
Well, we've got a new variant of the coronavirus now.
Oh gosh,
the Indian variant, which people are frightened of, because tomorrow now, because obviously
only because it's foreign. That's typical racism, Phil.
That's right.
If it was just like the Kentish variant, which is from England, probably wasn't considered quite as frightening because people are inherently racist.
Because it's a foreign variant, the government have decided to stand at the right cliffs of Dover and go, now stop that, rather than create a vaccine. They're just going to tell it to stop. Oh, do you know who we are? Stop that. Stop it.
I love the fact that Brits created their own vaccine, and it was quite good, actually. Our vaccine is quite good. It may cause some bubbles in your blood. You might have a blood clot or two.
When I was a kid, my parents had a kind of phrase book for when you go to Spain, but it was like a really xenophobic phrase book. It had a whole list of, I've still got it in the flat somewhere, a whole list of expressions for if you get into any difficulties in Spain. But all the expressions were things like, now stop that. All things like that. And that man is following me everywhere. Go away. I don't wish to speak to you. It was brilliant.
I shall alert the authorities.
Yeah, that's right. It was all stuff like that.
Someone asked in a controversial phrasing of a question and a topic, but someone asked who was the Yoko for these lads. So apparently one of our viewers wants to know who the Yoko Ono was who allegedly broke up the act. I would say that Yoko has suffered long enough for taking blame that she did not earn. But
it was actually Yoko Ono, funnily enough.
That's right. Yeah. She
Phil was seeing her.
I was.
And she just couldn't help herself.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I formed a double act with Yoko Ono. The act was like over 4 hours long, and so no one would book us.
We didn't do it naked when we did it, but they did.
Well, when I started going out with Yoko, Paul did it clothed and I did it naked, and that sort of led to the end of the double act.
Really. Right.
Yes.
Right. And then she fled to New York.
Yeah.
And became an American. The
rest is history.
Well, thank you, Phil. We're going to give Paul a chance to recover from the shock and.
I know it is an awful shock, isn't it?
Grill him some more.
See you in a few weeks, Phil, hopefully.
Yeah, all right. See you, Paul.
Phil Whelans, live from London at 2:00 in the morning. I hope you can fall asleep now.
Love you, man.
Cheers,
Speak
guys.
to you soon.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Brendan. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers. Thank you.
Ta-ra.
How brilliant.
Paul, I hope that was shocking and surprising and delightful.
It was all of the above. Phil is a very funny guy.
So I don't think everybody knows that amongst your theater credits and things like that, these two things that I find wonderfully bizarre. George from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the MC from Cabaret, on the other hand.
Yeah, both of those were when I was a young actor and working with a theatre company in West London, and had the great chance to just play a whole variety of different parts. And I was way too young to play George at the time. But and I always thought I'm going to play George again when I'm the right age to play George, and it hasn't happened. But it was just part of my. I need to be an actor now. I need to reinforce my training, and the MC was also absolute complete delight to play that. I wasn't a very good dancer before that. Probably not very much better by the time I finished.
I don't know. Maybe you probably still have some moves. So you've done quite a number of American television series, and even been able to do French dialect on television. I can't remember where I saw it, but you did. Do you
I did
remember?
A show called Timeless, which few people have watched, where I played a 18th century French guy in a time when the French were still surgeon. And one of the things is that you can play, if you have a language, you can audition and play it. And I've played a few different French or French kind of English-speaking French. I have separate reels. I have a show reel for French-speaking French and one for French characters who are speaking English, because the French person who speak English have certain characteristic sound, and so it is possible to how you say. Emulate the sound of the French person who is speaking English.
Yeah, I see. I would have tried that had I gone first. But I'm not.
On parle français tous les deux, Monsieur Mike.
Oui, petit peu de français, mais après ça,
le déluge.
Je suis. Oui. The thing about being English and coming to America and then trying to convince an agent that you can do a convincing American dialect, you can do a convincing French and that sort of thing. Was that not a challenge, or did it matter because you had a reel already to show agents and things like that?
Yes, and there are agents who want to take on Brits anyway. But they expect you to learn to have a good American accent also. So that's part of the auditioning for an agent process, is to show you could work locally. However, as I've been noticing recently, there's a show called The Undoing with Hugh Grant and other people on HBO. And
Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman's in it too.
Yeah.
And if you watch that show, there are people from all over the world playing Americans extraordinarily badly.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion. The accents are all over the place.
They really are. Yeah.
And it's very reassuring when you're thinking, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm sure you are too. I've done a number of shows with American accents, plays and improv shows, where at the end it's been my personal thing that if nobody knew that I wasn't American, then that's an achievement. And then you watch things like some of the terrible accents that are out there, and you think nobody cares, and it kind of doesn't matter. So you're just trying your best to be, because you're convincing the gatekeepers. The people on the set don't really care.
Yeah, and the audience certainly
they don't care.
They're delighted when they find out.
Where's he from?
Yeah.
He sounds like he's from my next door town. No, that guy was speaking nothing like close to an American accent.
Let's see. I wanted to just ask you about a couple of jobs. Let's see. American Horror Story. You played a
that's a sad story. I played American Horror Story, and they wrote a lovely character for me, and most of it never got filmed because they were days and days and days behind. So and it was like the last couple of episodes of the entire run, and I was going to be like I was the tour manager for Kajagoogoo, and they had scenes written and everything, but they never got to them. And so I would turn, you know what it's like, I would turn up and they'd reached the end of the day and they were so far behind they never got to them. So
yeah,
that's a terrible story, Mike.
It's not terrible. That's a true Hollywood experience that
Yes.
very few people think, you know. I'm terrified of posting on social media that I've booked a job or something, because you just know that there's a chance that it's never going to see the light of day. That's just one of those things.
And even if it does, they're probably cutting away from you to the lead person anyway. So all the things you thought were going to be you are kind of like,
yeah.
The rest of it is a picture of a grinning, handsome lead person.
I was just watching. We were watching the superhero show, Jupiter something, and with Josh Duhamel, and there was a scene with him where he's talking to someone, and they never showed the other person's face. They never even came around to the back to just for a second to show the other person's face. They just stayed on him for this seemingly several minute long scene. And I was like, oh man, I feel terrible for that actor who's just
who was probably sitting in that caravan the whole time and never got called to set because probably. Who knows? Yeah. This is a terrible business to be in, full of disappointments and whatever. But I don't care. I'm English. I'm so happy to be here. I think that's it. I mean, if you have a good attitude, like I never expected to be famous or anything. The fact that I'm kind of like a jobbing working actor in Hollywood is some kind of amazing marvel to me. Yeah. Anything we get is just like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about when you have to change gears. I'm doing a gear shifter where you can't see. When you have to change gears from directing something, directing stoner comedy or Sorkin or Jane Austen or something like that, versus just showing up to be an actor person. There's obviously some sort of gear shift that has to happen. Do you notice that, or for you is it just?
Yeah, because if you know this, if you put on shows, if you're a mounter of shows, you have I love putting on shows because I love structuring and analyzing the material and then structuring a show off the basis of the material. It's very hard to switch that off, and sometimes you can be in a show thinking, I think the structure of this should be X or Y, and it's not. And so there's part of I have to switch that part of my brain off. On the other hand, there are times when it's just an absolute delight to simply turn up and not have any responsibility and just to be in somebody else's show.
Yeah, that part is that's a learned appreciation, I think, is to get to the point where you can walk in and realize, I don't have to worry about this or that or the other thing because I'm just here to, provide my actingness.
Actingness is the best kind ofness, and I if everyone could have actingness,
there's no-ness like actingness.
Yes.
How has it been teaching online? There's a question here about how has it been teaching online versus teaching in person?
Well, like all of us, I thought it'd be a disaster, and then almost immediately, the very first week, the very first class. Where my little character core class did a documentary on love, and we just structured it like a documentary with voices to camera and little stories. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fine. It's just different and it's more filmic. And so I've really enjoyed the process of working with people who've not had to kind of get stuck in traffic on their way to a theatre. And the main thing is there's all these wonderful people from all over the country and all over the world who are able to come and take part in classes and shows. It's been a miracle to have people on the East Coast do shows with us, or even in different countries. So I've had no problem at all. I'll probably find it hard to adjust back to rooms again.
And a person on Twitch asked if you had your will you, I guess like I'll rephrase it a tiny bit. Will you continue to do online classes, or do you think you'll take a break from the screen and just do in-person classes?
Well, I think as an institution, Impro Theatre is planning to continue online classes.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to be one of the people involved in teaching them, because I really like it. I like being in a room. I like the communication involved. I like pouring energy through a screen. Obviously, I'm not doing that now. But how about now? How about now?
Be a little more casual. We're looking for somebody to read it a little more casually. Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I think that being able to have somebody from Tokyo and somebody from Poland and somebody from Scandinavia and et cetera, all in the same room at the same time is just a miracle. It's amazing. And then also I think the energy of doing an in-person class, and then we haven't done in-person classes in over a year. We haven't done in-person performances in over a year. The energy of being able to do an in-person class on Thursday morning and then do an online class on Thursday night. The online class will do nothing but benefit from the fact that I am now also doing in-person classes or in-person performances. You know, because
I agree. I'm curious about how it's going to, also because I think that over the last year, I suspect, have all been working with the notion of how filmic this can be, and working with your eyes, and just trying to communicate more subtly than we might do if we were having to fill a big theatre. So bringing that learned experience back onto a stage again, I think it's going to be very interesting.
Speaking of learned experience, what do you think when somebody shows up in your class and they've taken impro classes, and I mean that in the sense of the word impro meaning improvisation, they've taken impro or improv classes for years or something, and they show up, do you find commonalities in habits or approaches that you can kind of narrow in on with students who show up and they have a certain amount of experience, and then you are saying like, okay, well, at Impro we teach ensemble narrative, ensemble storytelling. Here are some things you might want to sort of keep in check. Or are there things that you could like list and say like, here's a few things that turn up?
I'm finding it increasingly hard to use the word students, because the people who are coming to Impro now are not students. They're practitioners of improvisation who've been out on stages a lot.
Absolutely.
And so I'm struggling with that word now. And I'm like, you've come to us for masterclasses, basically. And that's a different way of approaching who you're teaching. There are certain things that happen in short form. In fact, I had an email conversation about this the other day, about certain things that you're taught when you're learning short form improv. And they include that you have to say yes, and immediately embrace it. And here at Impro, where we're doing long form, no is not a block. It's simply not a block. If I say, will you marry me? And you say no, that's the beginning of a story.
Right.
Where I now have to go out into the world and find somebody else, or wait until you may have come round, or maybe we'll get back together again. So no is not a block. Endowments are unreliable. I have a concept which I've called, and I hope will go into my book eventually, the unreliable endowment, which is if I say to you, Mike, Tom is a liar, I might be the liar.
Exactly. We just played with this last week in a class that I'm doing. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's a mind-blowing concept for an improviser who's been taught to accept everything they're given. Is that that might say more about you than it does about Tom. And these are now sophisticated levels that we can play with. And if you have a story idea, you can hang on to it for a half a show and see if it's still relevant in a half a show's time. You don't have to do what happens next. Do it now. You can save it up. Also, I was having this conversation about, you don't talk about other people or stuff that's happened in the past or off screen. Well, of course you do. Because a play is written backwards as well as forward. So you have to talk about what's happened in the past, because that helps drive what's going to happen next. And the play goes backwards, further and further backwards, until the big reveal teaches you what's going to happen right at the end. So to me, it's about whatever you were taught was true, but now there are additional things that are possible.
Yeah, it's sort of like more things can be true than you've known before. Like it's sort of getting people to understand that on a bigger playing field with more playing equipment, there are more discoveries that can be made. And I mean, it is fascinating sometimes to have a person come in who's got a great deal of experience and have them at the whole class or part of the class does a scene or something like that, and then someone says, "No, wait a minute, this happened and this happened. How is that okay?" And that sort of thing. And then you kind of have to deconstruct and say, "Well, actually, this is a much bigger gymnasium with many more ropes and ladders to play with."
And the biggest thing is when people have come from a purely comedic improv background, and we have to explain why it is that they have to stop making jokes, which has been their lifeblood for all of their career, and instead learn to act again, or kind of like come to rely on building a character, and then allowing or finding that your instinct to make jokes now can be overlaid on the top of an ability to produce an acted character.
Yeah. And an active character that is three-dimensional and has vulnerability and flaws and
yes.
and everything else, and isn't just sort of a slick veneer of one essence or something like that.
I sometimes tell the story of an impressionist, an English impressionist called Alistair McGowan, who was just a brilliant impressionist and could go on and do impressions of everybody as a stand-up, and that was his thing. And then one day he said, "No, I want to learn how to do stand-up properly." And he stopped doing all of his impressions and instead learned how to do stand-up, how to write and craft observational material. Once he was excellent at doing that, he reintroduced the impressions. So now he's a TV star in Britain with on the BBC TV series because he learned how to do a thing properly and then reintroduce the thing that made the laughs easy for him. So to me, that's like, let go of the comedy, learn how to do improv properly. Then you can relay those comedy instincts back on top of what you've now mastered. Yeah,
that's pretty great. What was your first acting gig? What was your first? Did you do like plays in the garden as a child and that sort of thing, or?
Yeah, no, but I kind of discovered comedy when I was at college, when I was at university, and just put together a little review. This is the time when a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News was very popular in England. Yes. Many people credit Monty Python with being a driver of comedic careers, but really I argue that a whole generation was influenced by a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was an extraordinarily funny show and falls into that punk thing that Phil was talking about earlier, because that inspired me directly to do a sketch show at my university. And once I'd done that, I didn't look back. I was doing sketch comedy, and then just later on discovered improv and theatre. So for me, my start was in sketch comedy.
And did you, when you started to act and get hired as an actor, were you ever I don't know, were you ever sort of tempted or lured back into master acting classes of any sort? Because I know that when I lived in New York and was doing very slick improv and sketch comedy and that sort of thing, I found myself sort of jealous. I guess jealous it might not be the right word, but kind of feeling a little bit neurotic maybe about not having gone to a conservatory program in acting, not having gone to Juilliard or something like this. And
that's why I joined a theatre company that was putting on plays in my 20s. In my late 20s, I did that, and that led to me doing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the Cabaret and also quite a lot of comedy and some Shakespeare. So that was my version of what you're talking about.
Right.
Because people from a comedy background often have not had that conservatory training, and they've had to kind of pick up their acting later. So that was my version of that.
Right. We did very similar things because I did.
and still do.
Yeah. And in what was a big change apart from all the other differences between America and England, but what you had to, at one point you had to throw a bunch of stuff into a suitcase and get on the Kontiki and come to America. What was the biggest thing? Was it missing your family, missing your friends? What was
Yeah,
you know?
starting again, coming to America initially, because my wife's American. She wanted to come back to live in the States. We'd met in London, but we came to LA where there was the possibility of an acting career. But for the first few months, I was listening to Thomas Dolby's expatriate tragedy songs of living in LA and feeling rootless because I was like, what have I done? But then work started to happen, and it was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I got to know people, and then joined Impro, and just knew more and more people. And suddenly, there's this whole amazing community of superbly talented, funny, smart people. And London was like that too. I have to say, London is full of amazingly smart and funny people who also take their craft very seriously. And my big fear was I've left all these people behind, but I can still talk to I'll go back to England and I'll see Phil and my friend Suki, and I just did a show recently. So on a Zoom show, I miss people desperately, and of course I'm so far away from my family, and I realized that's also true of many Americans, and that's what Thanksgiving is. And it took me a long time. It took me coming to America to realize that's what Thanksgiving is.
And did you? So we here on the Impro airwaves, we did a show that we'll bring back at some point soon, that Dan O'Connor put together called Le Roundabout, where we did at least one all UK edition where people in America and in the UK were all English, and a few other episodes with like Luke and Phil and Suki and that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing that would only have happened if everybody turned up at a festival, at like the Iceland Improv Festival or at the New South Wales Improv Festival or something like that. And in the age of Zoom, suddenly we're able to do these sorts of performances, which is sort of brilliant and brings you home, as you said.
I once more, I absolutely loved doing that English show. It was so delightful.
Oh man, it was great.
Luke and Phil are so smart. So is Suki and Helen. Just being able to have Helen Alamano be part of that, who lives here, and she's an American Brit. That was so great to kind of like have that group together. I loved the Roundabout. Was a really nice idea, and I know you took it over looking after it from Dan.
Yeah, and we'll bring it back and other things like it, because international casts, I think, are such an amazing way for everybody to have a little bit of cross-pollination of style and that sort of thing. I mean, we did at least one Roundabout with a minimum of 3 entirely different schools of improv represented. In other words, the schools of improv split was much bigger in the 90s and the early 2000s than it is now. I mean, people really drawing hard lines about like, well, I studied here and therefore we do it like this.
I hate that.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that had happened in England was that the Herald did not really exist in Britain until the last 10 years, maybe. I mean, I haven't lived there, so I don't know exactly how long. But the Herald did not exist in Britain, and so coming to America and finding that most of the huge schools are to do with the Herald was kind of bizarre. We were doing long form back in the 80s and 90s, but it was nothing to do with the Herald. And we were doing full length plays. And so the Herald is such a weird thing to me still. But now some of the major schools in London are teaching the Herald. And I'm thinking that's actually a great shame to me, because it's such a regimented thing. I remember having a conversation with Randy Dixon, saying that he knew the Herald when it was a free-form thing. It was just a free-form thing, but it got completely structured in order to be teachable. and that he would have been horrified if he'd realised what the Harold had become. You have to do this in the first scene, that in the second. So I still don't like the notion of the Harold. I just don't like it. Put some actors on a stage, let them find some motivation, some character, and some relationships, and see what happens.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. Finally, we have to jump off. There is a finally. We need you to offer some advice. So we need you to offer some advice to people who are frustrated with their improvisation and or acting. It isn't. I'm okay. I'm feeling okay, actually. In terms of improv and acting.
You can be honest.
It's me. So just some advice that you find yourself, maybe it's advice that you find yourself giving to a lot of people generally about acting or improv or about their career, that sort of thing. But dealer's choice, you can decide whatever you'd like to offer, and maybe I'll make a little soundbite of it for the future. This will be a podcast, Paul, at some point. That's audio only, so you can't do any weird hand motions in order to demonstrate your advice.
Okay. A thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is that casts are too big, and the experience of taking part in a show can be disconnected, unsatisfying. You're sitting off stage most of the time. The very strong personalities have taken over, and you hate yourself by the end of it and think you're talentless. I say, put on a show somewhere for no people at all with 2 other people. You won't be left out. You'll be engaged the whole time. You'll surprise yourself with what you achieve and the various different characters you're obliged to play to fill in the time. And I'm starting to think more and more about very, very small cast shows and the great joy and energy that can be involved in. I'm doing a 2-hander thing at the moment with Laurie Schwartz, where we're on her Tech Cat platform. She interviews me as a variety of different incompetent British business people, and it's just me and her, and we can easily fill a half an hour with nonsense. And the energy is sustained all the way through. It's like me and you here. We sustain the energy. Phil comes along and adds some more, but it's the 2 of us, and I don't go quiet for 20 minutes at a time, feeling more and more disconnected. Yeah. So that would be my advice. Form a group with just 2 or 3 people and go and do shows.
Terrific advice.
In fact, one of the things I always used to say at the beginning of any workshop or class was, thank you for coming. Now go and set up a show somewhere. Because that's the best way you'll learn, is just to go out there and do it, and then come and get some instruction to help refine things. Oh,
I learned how to improvise by improvising in front of audiences. There's no question about that. It's just, well, we've run over time. So let's thank Jennifer Epps, our moderator, Brendan Davis, our OBS tech op, and you for watching, Phil Whelans for joining us from the UK, and our guest, Paul Rogan, for being a wonderful Impro Talk guest. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. And thank you, Brendan and Jen and Phil and Mike.
Thank you. See you.